Hello.
Hello.
Part 4 of
Yep.
these.
We tried to squeeze all of them in before Christmas, but only part 4 and 5 are gonna be after Christmas.
Yep.
He has a lot. Mr. Nightmare has a lot of Christmas horror stories.
Yeah, and plus there are also two other random ones that are not Christmas related, but they're winter related.
Yeah. Okay. I'll share my screen.
Okay.
It was a cold December night a week before Christmas. My family always does Christmas in our Hamptons, New York summer house. The Hamptons are always quiet this time of year, as a large chunk of the real estate there is owned by rich people who have 2 or 3 other houses elsewhere in the
Ignore
country.
my dog barking.
My dad and I were at the house first before the rest of my family, as my mom and sister still had work until the next weekend. My dad was retired at the time, and school was over for winter break for me, so we wanted to just go to the Hamptons house early. We all have our own bedrooms in this house, which sits on a quiet dead-end road. My dad turned on the heat and water and all that stuff that he always has to take care of when we return for the first time in months. I brought my PS3 to play in my room. I spent most of the first day there playing video games. On that first night we were there was a big snowstorm, another reason we wanted to come early, to beat the crappy road conditions that would come for days after the storm. The next morning when I woke up and went out to the kitchen, my dad asked me when I built the snowman. I responded, "What do you mean?" He said, "The snowman in the backyard." I went to look out the window, and there was at least 2 feet of fresh snow. But there was also a snowman sitting in our backyard. It had 2 sticks for arms angled up into the air, and it had eyes and a smile carved into the head. The eyes and mouth side was facing the window. I said to my dad I didn't build that. My dad laughed and said, "Must be the neighbor kids." My dad thought it was an innocent joke, so I did as well. The next night is where things got bad though. I was in bed asleep and suddenly woke up to a distinct thump on my window. I was terrified. I pulled the blankets over myself to hide, to not be in view of whoever might be out there. But after 5 minutes, I started to wonder maybe it was snow that fell off the roof and blew into the window. I got up to peek out the window. I screamed because at first I thought what I saw was a person, but it was actually another snowman standing right outside my window. There was an angry frown on this one instead of a smiling face. I screamed for my dad, and he came rushing inside. I pointed at the window, and this time he wasn't happy. He said he would go next door in the morning and talk to the kids' parents. I slept in my sister's room the rest of that night. The next morning, my dad went next door and rang the bell, but they weren't home. There were no cars in the driveway. That meant they weren't even in town. That was the only nearby house with kids in it, so this didn't exactly help explain the situation. For 5 or 6 days straight, nothing else happened until Christmas Eve night. The rest of our immediate family, plus all 4 of our grandparents, were now in the house. We were in the living room. This was before dinner, but it was already dark out. Someone knocked on the front door instead of using the doorbell. We weren't expecting any other family. I started to get nervous. My dad went over and asked, "Who is it?" Someone on the other side of the door started saying, "Please let me in, I need help." The door has no peephole or windows, nor are there any windows that would allow us to see who was on the other side of the door. My dad asked what's wrong, and the voice on the other side said, "I have no one to spend Christmas with, please help me." We all looked at each other now, and my dad yelled to please leave before we call the police. The person on the other side said, "Okay, I'll leave, please don't call the police." He never opened the door. We instantly tied this to the creepy snowmen. We knew it had to be connected. And we were right. On Christmas morning, there was a note taped to our front door. It said, "To the best of my memory, I just wanted to have a little fun. I built the snowman for the boy in the house. I don't have anyone to spend the holiday with. Hurt." In one way or another, I think whoever left that note on our door and built those 2 snowmen was mentally ill or unstable. It's very unlikely that it was meant to be a joke, considering he came to our front door. I think he was dangerous, and even if he wasn't inherently hostile, the fact that he did what he did is just enough for him to be considered somebody none of us wanted to meet. It was Christmas of 2016. My name is Andre, and at the time I was 21 years old. Our family was all at our Uncle Joshua's place for the holidays. Well, it was Christmas Eve. My immediate family, plus my cousins and other close family, decided let's go to my uncle and aunt's place in downtown Miami. We come from Connecticut, so we're not used to warm weather around the holidays. It was Friday, the day before Christmas Eve. My brother Nico and I, being young single males and being in Miami, wanted to go out. We were hearing about a bunch of Christmas-themed parties going on at clubs and bars. Nico was 18 at the time, but he had a fake ID, so we figured he'd be all right. We went to this one club on Miami Beach that was having a Christmas-themed event. Mostly everyone online was wearing Santa hats, so it felt festive. But it was all a waste of time because at the front of the line, the bouncer not only told us it would be $100 to get in, but he also called Nico out on his fake ID. So we tried a bar not too far away, and we got into this one. There were some people wearing Santa hats here too. I guess that was expected on the weekend of Christmas. While we were at the bar, this older woman started talking to Nico. I overheard most of their conversation. The woman appeared to be mid-40s, and I heard her keep telling my brother how she has such a thing for younger guys with Hispanic accents. To be honest, it sounded kind of creepy and weird, but Nico was probably blinded by the fact that a woman was hitting on him. I just let him do his thing. The woman was wearing a blue Santa hat and had on a sexually provocative Christmas sweater. The two of them were talking for so long that I ended up making friends with the guy sitting next to me at the bar. Then suddenly Nico patted me on my shoulder and said he's gonna leave with the woman. I told him all right. I was happy for him, I guess. I stayed at the bar not much longer after that, and I just called an Uber back to my uncle's, assuming Nico would be spending the night with the woman. I was mid-Uber ride when my phone rang. Nico was calling me. I picked up to static. It sounded as though maybe he pocket dialed me, but I heard a male's voice in the background that didn't sound like my brother. And then suddenly another male's voice could be heard yelling. I said Nico's name over and over, trying for acknowledgement, but the call eventually disconnected. Obviously, this was a pretty concerning phone call. I was under the impression he was alone with a woman. I tried calling him like 10 times, and finally someone picked up. But it wasn't Nico. It was the voice of some older man with an extremely deep voice. When I asked who this was, he said he found this phone on the sidewalk. I asked him if he could drop the phone off at my uncle's place or if he could meet me somewhere. He didn't answer that. I just heard talking in the background, and then I heard screaming. It was Nico's voice in the background, screaming my name, screaming help. Then the call disconnected. I asked the Uber driver to pull over, as I was freaking out trying to call anyone in my family. It was late, no one was picking up. I explained the situation to the driver, and he advised I call the police immediately. That's what I did. The police came to my uncle's place, where I woke my family up, informing them that Nico was in trouble. I had to give my best description of the woman's appearance from the bar and what time he left the bar. Then my dad and I, along with the police, went to the bar that we were at, and it was then that I got a phone call from a random number. It was Nico. He was out of breath, gasping into the phone, explaining that he was kidnapped and barely escaped. He was currently using a stranger's phone. All of us went to Nico's location, which was a sketchy street somewhere in North Miami. When we found him, his face was a bloody mess. He had 2 black eyes, and all of his possessions that he had on him were stolen. He gave his whole story. He left with the woman who claimed to have called an Uber or Lyft. When the alleged ride arrived at their pickup point, which was in some quiet back alley area, Nico found out once inside the car that it wasn't in fact an Uber. It was a trap. There were 2 men in the car who immediately held him down and threatened to shoot him if he didn't keep quiet. They started to drive for a while, and during this time, one of the men called my number and they threatened to harm him if he yelled out anything, which he did, and that explained the bloody face and black eyes. They broke his phone, took his wallet, keys, and whatever else was on him. As the car was stopped and he wasn't being held down anymore, he ran for it out of the car. They didn't chase him, the car just sped off and disappeared. He said he believed they were going to kill him and dump his body somewhere if he didn't run. Police apparently were never able to identify the woman who appeared in the video footage from the bar. Nico said none of the men were wearing masks, more of a reason he thought they'd kill him. This completely ruined the entire holiday weekend, but we were all just happy he was alive. On Christmas night, we were all awoken to Nico's screams in the middle of the night. He was screaming, "She's in the house." I woke him up from whatever nightmare he was having. I have to say though, him screaming, "She's in the house," made me think back to her creepy smile, and made one eye open that night. I bought a small house with my brother George a couple years back. We hosted Christmas the first year we lived in the house just as a way of getting the family to see the place and getting everyone together for the first time in forever. We don't have the biggest family in the world, so it was the two of us, our parents, our aunt and uncle, cousin, and our sister and two nephews. Our sister came with our nephews and her husband first to help us out with the cooking and preparing. They brought their dog Mika along as well. Since they lived 2 hours away, they were going to be spending the night at our house. The rest of our family lives under an hour away, so they wouldn't be staying. Not that that house would have much more room for additional people staying over anyway. During our Christmas dinner, at one point we talked about some of the murders that happened in our area recently. Bodies had been found in the woods in our county. It wasn't a topic that we kept going long, as our mom and my sister wanted us to drop it for the sake of the holiday and the kids. After dinner, we all had some wine in the living room with a Christmas movie on in the background as we talked. After a few hours, the family started to slowly leave, until it was just my brother and I, and my sister, her husband, and her kids. The kids went to bed before us. The four of us stayed up later having more wine. My girlfriend ended up coming over past 10 to spend the rest of the night with me, since all of her family had gone home. Eventually, Christmas night was over, and it was time to go to bed. I woke up to my girlfriend shaking me. The room was still dark. I groggily looked at the clock next to my bed, and it said 2-something a.m. I asked my girlfriend what the issue was, and she whispered, "Listen." I listened, and heard Mika out in the hall growling. I got out of bed and entered the hall to see what was going on. Then I saw that the back door to our house was wide open, and a breeze of cold air started to hit me in the face. Mika was looking out the door. I checked if anyone was out there, and as I was at the back door, I heard my brother's voice call out my name from the darkness outside. He sounded like he was far away in the woods. I was worried he was in trouble or needed help with something. I went back to my room to tell my girlfriend, as I put my shoes and coat on. I stepped outside with a flashlight. There was a light dusting of snow on the ground, enough to see footmarks leading from the back door down to the back deck towards the woods. I yelled back George's name very loudly. I heard his voice call back my name. It was confirmed he was in the woods now. But oddly, as I entered the woods, his footprints slowly faded and got harder to see, until they were just impossible to continue following entirely. I screamed back at the top of my lungs, "Where are you? What's wrong?" I once again heard George's voice call back just my name. Every time he called me, his voice was the same distance away. I was uncomfortable getting any further away from my house because I didn't want to get lost in the woods. I tried finally calling George's phone, but he didn't pick up. I continued a little further into the woods, but now George's yelling stopped. As much as I yelled out into the woods, there was dead silence. Not even the sound of a bug in the freezing cold. Just the sound of the light breeze. And suddenly my phone rang. I was hopeful it was George, but it was my girlfriend. I picked up, and she said, "Chet, George is in his bedroom right now." "What?" I said. That didn't make any sense. I was hearing his voice this entire time in the woods. I asked her to check if my sister's husband was also still on one of the pull-out couches, and 30 seconds later, she said yes. Suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone in the woods, like anyone was about to grab me from any direction. I turned back the way I came and started running as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I saw the backyard light from my house becoming more visible through the trees. I made it back to my house, and everyone was awake now. George and everyone else had a look of horror on their faces when I explained that Mika was growling, looking at the wide open back door, and the fact that there were footprints leading into the woods. But the scariest part was that I thought for sure that the voice I was hearing was that of George, and whoever it was knew my name. We contemplated calling the police for half an hour, and then ended up doing so. A police officer came and just asked us any questions like if anything was stolen, if we know anyone that may mean us harm, etc. Then within half an hour, and after telling us to call back if anything else happens, he left. I don't know if I think this had anything to do with the murders that were going on at this time in our county, but I did think it was worth mentioning in the story. Nothing else did ever happen after that night, but we can't for the life of us logically explain any of this. I'm still scared to go in or near the woods past dark.
This one right here is the one that we're watching next. 3 scary real Christmas horror stories. Ready for the next one? Your mic is off. Okay.
I forgot to turn my mic on the both OBS and the meeting.
It was Christmas Eve night. We always hosted Christmas Eve at our house when I was a kid. My grandparents, uncles, and my cousins would always come. This year I must have been like 12. My mom was making duck, as she always did on Christmas Eve. I was helping her cook and prepare this year because my dad actually had a really bad cold and was trying to not touch anything or stay too close to anyone. Our family slowly started showing up one by one. My Uncle Joe first with my cousins Chris and Valerie. They were the closest in age to me, so I've always been closest with them out of all my cousins. As soon as they got there, I got distracted from helping out my mom, because Chris brought over a video game for my PlayStation that I'd been wanting to play, Driver 2. We ran upstairs to my room to put the disc in and play, and Valerie came just to watch. But within a few minutes, my mom called my name up the stairs angrily, ruining the fun. I was hoping she'd just let me play, but she was already stressed from the amount of work that cooking and preparing for a big family is. So we had to resume playing the game later. We left it on pause, and all 3 of us went back downstairs. Most family had arrived already. I was juggling saying hi to everybody while helping set up the table and stuff. Within half an hour, the whole family was there, and dinner was almost ready. The table was already set, and half the family was already at the dinner table, including myself. Then I remember my mom yelling, "Ah." She yelled for me to run to the basement to grab the stuffing, which she forgot to make. Our house didn't have an actual pantry closet, so my mom used the backside of the bar in the basement as a pantry. I went down to the basement to fetch the stuffing.
I'll cut it out with editing.
Okay.
I was behind the bar looking for the damn stuff, when I noticed a blanket covering something in the corner next to the 2 sofas. At first glance, I assumed it was a person, one of my cousins hiding, trying to scare me. As I walked a little closer, I could confirm it was a person based on the shape of what was underneath the blanket. I could see the person's head. I stood there waiting to see if they'd react to my not making noise. I was wondering how he or she would know when to jump out to scare me if they couldn't see me under that blanket. Suddenly the lights to the basement turned off, and I heard the basement door slam shut. I yelled "screw you" to whoever it was, Valerie or Chris. I knew it was one of them, not my older cousins. I was going to scare whoever was under the blanket. I had a feeling the 2 of them were trying to mess with me, but now the joke was on them. I was going to scare whoever was under that blanket. I tiptoed on the carpet to the corner of the room and yanked the blanket off whoever it was and started screaming to scare them. But instead of hearing one of my cousin's childish screams, I heard nothing. Then a very strong grip grabbed me. Whoever it was went for my neck as soon as they felt where it was in the dark. For a few seconds I thought it was Chris roughhousing me, and I was screaming at him to stop, but this felt like the grip of a grown man. I started to scream for my life with whatever air was able to escape my lungs. The door to the basement opened and the light turned on, revealing an old, dirty, disheveled-looking man. He let me go and ran to the basement door which led to the backyard, not the basement door that led to the upstairs. Half my family came rushing down. I was crying and screaming he went that way, pointing at the open backyard basement door. Two of my uncles ran outside to try to find him, while my mom and aunts came to my side to try to comfort me as I was crying. I was literally shook. My whole body was shaking and I felt ill. My mother called the police to report this. My uncles were out in the streets for like 20 minutes looking from house to house for the man. It made no sense because it didn't look like he would have been able to make it too far, which makes me think he was hiding somewhere in the backyard or a neighbor's yard. The officer said it sounded like some homeless squatter hiding from the cold, and that they'd gotten a number of these calls that month. That didn't make things sound any better after that allegedly homeless man had his hand around my neck. My cousins were trying to pull a prank on me, hence why they turned the light off and shut the door originally. But this was obviously not part of their plan. So my family learned a valuable lesson at my horrifying expense. Always keep every single entrance to your house locked at all times. It was Christmas Eve night. I was a little kid. My dad was briefly dating this woman named Sydney. My mom died when I was really young, so for most of my childhood, I didn't know what it was like having a motherly figure in the house. When my dad started seeing Sydney, she would spend the weekends at our house once in a while, and my siblings and I liked that. Sydney always seemed like a decent woman, but I was a little kid, and I was perhaps biased because I just liked having a woman in the house. It was Christmas Eve. Sydney was spending the weekend with us for Christmas. I don't think she had much family herself. We watched the movie Elf as a family, my brother, sister, dad, and Sydney. After the movie ended, my dad and Sydney went to bed. I stayed up with my brother a little later to watch the Polar Express. Around the time the movie ended, Sydney came downstairs to tell us that it's maybe time to go to sleep. I was young, but I was old enough to be suspicious about Santa Claus by now, and I had a feeling it was always my dad putting the gifts under the tree. I went to my room to play video games for a few hours. I snuck out of my room around 12 o'clock to see if the presents were under the tree yet. My bedroom was the only bedroom on the den level, so every other bedroom was upstairs. The living room and tree were on the first level, a half flight of stairs above my bedroom. I snuck out of my room and tiptoed up the stairs. I peered into the living room, which was lit up by the Christmas tree. There were presents under there, and there was Sydney under the tree. At first I thought she was placing the gifts there, and I thought I was right all along, that Santa wasn't real. But I quickly realized she wasn't placing the gifts there. She was shaking them, like trying to figure out what's inside of the boxes. She picked up one gift which was in a gift bag, started digging through it, and pulled out something that looked like it was for my sister, like makeup. She analyzed it and put it back in the bag. I didn't know what she was doing, but I kept watching. I saw her walk to the kitchen and go to the ledge where my dad keeps his wallet. What I saw next, I couldn't believe. She went through my dad's wallet and took out a few bills and put it in the pocket of her pajama pants. I kept watching as she went into the cabinet above the ledge, the medicine cabinet. She took out what looked to be one of my dad's prescription medication bottles, and she started analyzing it. She opened it, sniffed it, and then looked to her left, right at me. It was as if she was about to do something very bad and was checking that the coast was clear first, and she saw me right away. Her eyes widened, and she put the bottle back in the cabinet. I hurried down the stairs back to my room and crawled into bed with my...
What?
Alright, we're back. Yeah, we have to pause for a bit.
Okay, I'll resume the video.
Yeah.
My little kid mind thinking I somehow could still pretend to be asleep. Seconds later, the door creaked open and then shut. I didn't look, but I didn't know if she entered the room or not. A few minutes passed, and I finally felt it was safe to check if she was gone. I looked up, and Sydney was standing right over my bed. I gasped and almost screamed. She looked down at me. All I could see was the silhouette of her figure, making the sight of her even creepier. She said she saw me watching her, and said in this angry whisper that she wasn't doing anything wrong. She just wanted to make sure my dad was taking his medication. I replied, okay, and she said Merry Christmas and left the room.
Shush.
The next day, after we opened gifts, my dad came into the living room angrily and said, "Who took $60 out of my wallet?" I looked at Sydney right away, who glanced back at me as if she knew that I knew. At that moment, I didn't tell my dad what I saw. But later that day, when my dad was still angry at my siblings and I, thinking one of us did it, I told him the truth of what I saw. My dad didn't believe me at first, but when I told him that she was going through his medication too, he started to believe me because why would I lie about that? Later that night, this created for a rather loud conversation between the two of them. But shockingly, my dad didn't ask Sydney to leave. She didn't admit to stealing his money, and I think my dad simply didn't know what to do. That night, I had my bedroom door locked, which my dad always told us to never do, but I just felt safer with it locked that night, and thank God I did lock it, because around the same time as the night before, I heard the doorknob to my bedroom door jiggle a few times. It was undoubtedly her, which the next day I confirmed when I asked my dad if it was him, and he said no. After she left that night, I begged and pleaded my dad to not have her over anymore because she scared me, and it looked like she was going to do something to his medication. I'm grateful my dad listened to me because he stopped seeing Sydney shortly after that. I wonder what she was actually going to do to his medication if she didn't notice me watching her. Christmas night of 2021. It was a Saturday night. I went up to Vermont to be with my family for the holiday and stay with them for the weekend. I was staying there from Saturday, Christmas Day, to Monday. For Christmas Eve, I went with my girlfriend to her family's gathering. For actual Christmas, I'd be with mine. She didn't come with me though. Our Christmas gathering wasn't huge, since our family's so spread out over the East Coast. It was my parents, my older brother, his girlfriend, my aunt and uncle, and myself. The house is big enough to accommodate all of us. We all did our family tradition of watching a movie together after dinner with the fireplace going. This year we watched Bad Santa, one of my dad's favorite Christmas movies. After the movie, we had pumpkin pie and ice cream, and afterwards played cards. Around 11, everyone started to get situated wherever they were sleeping. My brother and his girlfriend took one of the 2 spare bedrooms, and my aunt and uncle took the second. There was a nice pull-out couch in the living room that I'd be sleeping on, which I did not mind. I liked being able to sleep by the fireplace and tree. It was very cozy. I had the TV on as I was nodding off. When I felt that I was about to fall asleep, I turned off the TV and Christmas tree lights. The fire was breathing its last breaths, and the room was just about pitch black. My memory faded into a dream actually about Christmas and my family. Only in my dream, we weren't at my parents' house, we were at my uncle's house, and more of my family members were there, like my cousin Jackie and my aunt Melissa. It wasn't a very exciting or unusual dream. We were at the dinner table, when suddenly all of my family members in my dream stopped talking, turned and looked at me, and my aunt Melissa said in a very serious voice, "There's someone in the house, wake up." I actually woke up after this, and my heart was already racing for some reason. The way my dream ended genuinely disturbed me. I sat up and looked around the dark room, actually feeling uncomfortable. The super high ceiling of the living room made me feel even more exposed. I heard a creak in the floor where the kitchen and living room meets. I looked in that direction. The fire was completely out now. There was no light in the room. Yet I thought I could see a person standing right where the kitchen starts. I said, "Is someone there?" expecting one of my family members to answer back. They didn't. The silhouette-looking shadow in the doorway of the kitchen was still there, though. I sat up just a little more to look closer at the doorway. The silhouette then started moving. It was a person. "Who is that?" I said louder. Whoever it was went towards the back door, and I heard the back door close. I started screaming for my family to wake up, and everyone came out of their rooms. Everyone. So what I had just seen was none of my family members. So my dad, brother, uncle, and I threw on our shoes and coats and ran out into the cold, looking around. We found a set of footprints in the snow leading into the woods. Mind you, it was like 2 in the morning, and the neighboring houses aren't exactly on top of each other, so none of us were exactly eager to go into the woods following some unknown person's footsteps. We instead called the police, and while we waited for them, my brother and I stood in the backyard watching the woods. The creepy pitch black woods where someone was hiding, potentially looking back at us without our knowledge. Everyone else was inside, looking to see if anything was stolen, and surprisingly, nothing of serious value was missing. But also, it's not like my parents had jewelry or money just sitting out in the open on the first floor. The police officers who came followed the footprints into the woods as far as they could until the trail seemed to disappear or just became impossible to follow. They had not gotten any other calls regarding break-ins that night, at least not to that point. But the next day, nothing was on the news about any break-ins either. So it may have just been a one-off fluke thing where my parents' house happened to be the target of someone trying to steal valuables, like expensive Christmas presents potentially. I'll tell you one thing though. I had a rough time falling asleep that following night in that living room again. The image of that person in the doorway to the kitchen still haunts me.
That be the end of part 4.
Yeah, that is the end of part 4.
So, see you in part 5.
Yep, see you in part 5.
So, yeah, goodbye.
And that's going to be the last part.
Yeah. And in part 5, we're probably not going to react to Christmas ones. It's mainly just going to be the 2 winter ones in the playlist.
No, we still have 2 more Christmas ones.
Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah,
Bye.
see you in part 5. Goodbye.